A narcissist may not start out as something evil, but the choices they make, repeated again and again over time, reshape who they are until they genuinely become something dark because they turn themselves into a channel for forces we cannot see. Forces that create imbalance, not just inside their own inner world, but in the world around them as well, rippling outward into everyone they touch. I have spoken about this idea many times before, about how the divine steps back from those who abandon truth and righteousness, about how a soul that keeps choosing darkness over and over eventually finds itself abandoned by that same divine presence. But that is simply the nature of the path. If you walk toward darkness long enough, darkness is what you become. The spiritual law behind this is not complicated or mysterious. We become whatever we repeatedly choose to embody, again and again, until it is no longer a choice, but who we are. Hello, I am Danish, and I work in narcissistic abuse recovery. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are exploring something heavier than usual, the specific point at which a narcissist stops being simply a difficult, wounded person and instead fully surrenders themselves to something evil. There's a threshold that gets crossed, and once it does, something fundamental shifts in the spiritual core of that person. They stop being a hurt human being who keeps making bad decisions, and they become something else entirely, a vessel, a conduit for forces that exist purely to tear down rather than build up. This is not really about mental illness anymore, and it is not about personality disorders in the clinical sense either. This is about a soul that has made a deliberate, fundamental decision to align itself with darkness rather than light. The universe responds to the choices we make, every single one of them. And when a person consistently, repeatedly chooses cruelty over creation, chooses destruction over growth, they open a door and invite in forces that resonate at that exact same frequency. I want to be clear about something before we go further because I think it matters. This threshold is not crossed in a single dramatic moment the way it might happen in a film. It is crossed slowly, in 1,000 small decisions, each one seemingly insignificant on its own. A small cruelty here, a choice to manipulate rather than communicate there, a decision to punish rather than forgive. None of these choices alone would define a person, but strung together, repeated daily, reinforced over months and years, they compound, they calcify. And eventually the person who made those choices is no longer recognizable as the person who started down that road in the first place. What began as a defense mechanism, a wounded response to their own pain, becomes something they actively choose again and again until choosing it becomes who they are. This is important to understand because it means the transformation, while real and while spiritually significant, did not happen overnight. It happened through accumulation. And that accumulation is exactly what opens the door to what I am describing. So let's talk about some of the hidden signs you can actually watch for in a person who has crossed that threshold. The first sign is in the eyes. The eyes tell the whole story if you know how to read them. Their eyes are usually the first thing to change, and I do not mean that as some poetic metaphor. I mean it quite literally. There is an emptiness that settles in, a kind of void where warmth used to live. You will start to notice they can hold a stare, unblinking, for stretches of time that feel unnatural, almost uncomfortable to witness. Their gaze stops being simply a look and becomes something closer to predatory, calculating like they are studying you the way a scientist studies a specimen under glass, quietly scanning for weaknesses they can later exploit. People who have lived through this often tell me the exact same thing when I ask them to describe the shift. They say it felt like looking into someone they used to know and finding nobody home. The warmth that used to greet them is simply absent, replaced by something flat and assessing. And what makes this particularly disorienting is that the change is not constant. In front of others, in public, at family gatherings, the warmth can snap back into place instantly, convincingly, as if it never left. It is only in private, only when no one else is watching, that the true emptiness shows itself. That inconsistency alone should tell you something important about what you are actually dealing with. The second sign is what I call ritualistic cruelty. Over time, their cruelty stops being random or unconscious and starts developing an almost ceremonial quality to it. They are not just hurting you in scattered, unpredictable moments anymore. They are building rituals around the harm itself. Maybe it looks like systematically chipping away at your confidence every single Sunday morning like clockwork. Maybe it shows up as carefully orchestrated public humiliation, timed deliberately for maximum effect. These patterns are not accidents or coincidences. They function almost like offerings, small ceremonies to the darkness they have chosen to embrace and serve. If you sit down and actually trace the timeline of these episodes, you will often find they cluster around specific days, specific hours, specific triggers that have nothing to do with anything you actually did and everything to do with some internal cycle running underneath their behavior. That is the part that makes it feel ritualistic rather than reactive. A reaction responds to something. A ritual repeats regardless of what is actually happening around it. The third sign to watch for is something I call energy feeding. You will notice yourself feeling drained in their presence in a way that goes far beyond normal tiredness or everyday exhaustion. They have essentially learned how to feed off your life force, your joy, your inner peace, pulling it from you the way something parasitic draws sustenance from a host. They will provoke emotional reactions in you, not simply as a means of control, though that is certainly part of it, but because on some level they are genuinely feeding off the raw energy your distress produces. You will notice they seem to come alive, almost energized, precisely when you are at your absolute lowest point. Think about the pattern honestly for a moment. A person who cares about you is generally troubled when you are struggling. They soften, they want to help. Your pain registers as something that pulls at them, but this is the opposite. You will watch them grow more animated, more talkative, almost lighter in their body, exactly when you are breaking down. That inversion, where your collapse becomes their fuel, is one of the clearest signals that something beyond ordinary human callousness is happening in that dynamic. There is also what I would call the violation of sacred boundaries. They will specifically target whatever matters most to you spiritually, your personal practices, your relationship with the divine, the deepest beliefs you hold close. And it does not stop at mockery. They actively work to corrupt these things at their root. If you pray, they will find ways to interrupt you. If you sit down to meditate, they will manufacture chaos around you right at that moment. Let me know in the comments if this particular pattern feels familiar to you, because I know it will resonate with a lot of people watching. If you find genuine peace out in nature, they will find some way to poison even that. It is worth sitting with why this specific target matters so much to them. Your spiritual life is often the deepest, most private root system you have, the place where your sense of self and your sense of meaning are most firmly anchored. If they can disturb that root system, they weaken everything that grows from it. Your confidence, your resilience, your ability to trust your own inner compass. This is why the timing of these interruptions is so rarely accidental. The quiet 10 minutes you set aside each morning, the one evening a week you reserve for stillness, these become exactly the moments where conflict mysteriously erupts, where a crisis suddenly needs your attention, where the peace you were reaching for gets pulled out from under you, right as you touch it. There is one more sign worth naming clearly before we move into the daily patterns, and that is the complete absence of remorse, even in rare moments when they are confronted with undeniable proof of the harm they have caused. A person who is simply wounded, simply struggling, will usually show some flicker of guilt somewhere, even if they cannot fully act on it yet. But someone who has crossed this particular threshold shows nothing. You can lay the evidence in front of them plainly, and you will watch their face stay completely unmoved, or worse, you will watch them pivot immediately into blaming you for making them look bad by bringing it up at all. That absence is not simply stubbornness or pride. It is the fingerprint of something that has fully hollowed out the part of a person that would normally respond to another person's pain. There are also daily behavioral patterns worth paying close attention to. One of them is what I call the morning poison. They begin each day by injecting toxicity straight into your world, often before you have even fully woken up. They are already planting seeds of doubt, fear, or anger before your feet hit the floor. This is not random or accidental. It is strategic because they want to control the emotional tone of your entire day right from the very first moment. Think about how much power there is in setting the tone before someone is even fully conscious. You have not had coffee, you have not gathered yourself, you have not had a single moment to build any kind of internal defense, and already something has been placed into your mind that will color everything you do for hours afterward. A comment about how you look, a sigh loaded with implication. A remark about something you supposedly did wrong yesterday, delivered just as you are stepping into the shower or reaching for your first cup of coffee. By the time you actually leave the house, you are already carrying a weight you did not choose and cannot easily set down. Then there is mimicry laced with mockery. They will start mirroring your spiritual practices, but always with a twisted, corrupted edge to it. If you keep a journal, suddenly they start journaling too, except theirs is focused entirely on cataloging your flaws. If you practice gratitude, they will mock the very idea of it, while simultaneously pretending to go along with it themselves. They are not simply copying what you do. They are crafting dark, inverted versions of the light you are trying to cultivate. And then there is the corruption of love itself. They will borrow the language of love, family, and spirituality to justify the cruelty they inflict on you. So, I hurt you because I love you, they will say. This is tough love. This is for your own good. God wants me to teach you humility. They take sacred concepts and weaponize them, turning ideas that are meant to heal into instruments of torment instead. This particular pattern is especially insidious because it hijacks the exact language you would normally trust. If a stranger said something cruel to you, you would recognize it instantly as cruelty and dismiss it. But when the words are wrapped in love, in faith, in family loyalty, your natural instinct is to give them the benefit of the doubt, to search for the good intention underneath the pain, because that is what love is supposed to do. They know this about you, whether consciously or not, and they exploit exactly that instinct. Every time you extend grace to a comment that should have been recognized as harmful, the pattern gets a little more entrenched, a little harder to name clearly, because now it is tangled up with everything you believe about loyalty and forgiveness and unconditional love. And when none of that seems to be working the way they want, they move to actively destroying your joy. They become almost allergic to any genuine happiness or peace you manage to find. The instant you experience real joy, they will look for a way to dismantle it entirely, not just dim it slightly, but obliterate it completely. They will manufacture crises right in the middle of your celebrations, create emergencies during your most peaceful moments, always precisely timed to disrupt whatever good you are feeling. It helps to actually sit with how disorienting all of this is to live through day after day, because from the outside it can sound almost abstract, almost theoretical. But if you are the one inside it, none of it feels abstract at all. You wake up already bracing for what mood is waiting for you in the next room. You find yourself constantly scanning, constantly trying to predict which version of this person you are about to encounter, because the whiplash between charm and cruelty is part of what keeps you destabilized. That destabilization is not incidental, it is functional. A person who never knows what is coming next cannot build the kind of settled inner ground that would let them see clearly and respond with strength. So the unpredictability itself becomes another layer of the pattern, another way that stability gets stripped away from you piece by piece until you barely recognize your own baseline anymore. There are also spiritual effects that tend to surface the longer you are exposed to this kind of pattern. You will start to experience real spiritual confusion. You will begin questioning your own connection to the divine, wondering if it was ever solid to begin with. They will work to make you doubt your intuition, your choices, your prayers, your spiritual experiences, all of it. You will find yourself wondering if you have somehow been abandoned, whether what you are living through is, in some very real sense, spiritual warfare being waged through this other person. This confusion tends to be one of the most disorienting parts of the whole experience because it attacks the very foundation you might normally turn to for stability. Under ordinary hardship, people often lean harder into their faith, their practices, their sense of connection to something larger than themselves, and that leaning provides real comfort. But here, the hardship itself is aimed directly at that foundation. So the very place you would normally go to steady yourself becomes shaky ground too. And that double loss, losing stability in your circumstances and losing stability in your spiritual footing at the same time, is part of what makes this kind of situation so uniquely exhausting to live through. Alongside that comes a kind of energy depletion. Your spiritual practices will start feeling significantly harder to sustain than they used to. Prayer will feel like wading through thick mud. Meditation will keep getting interrupted by unwanted, intrusive thoughts you cannot seem to quiet. You will feel spiritually starved even while actively trying to nourish your own soul. Then there is what I would describe as psychic intrusion. You may start having nightmares that center around them. They will show up in your dreams, often in symbolic, distorted forms. You will feel their presence lingering, even in moments when they are nowhere near you physically. This is not simply your imagination running wild. It is spiritual warfare in a very real sense. I have talked about this at length before in a lot of depth, and I have lived through this exact experience myself, so I am not speaking about it purely in the abstract. All of this takes a real toll on the body as well, not just the spirit, and I think that connection is worth naming, honestly. Chronic exposure to this kind of environment tends to show up physically. Sleep becomes shallow and interrupted. Your nervous system stays on alert, even in moments that should be safe and restful. Your body starts holding tension in places it never used to. Your shoulders, your jaw, the pit of your stomach. This is not separate from the spiritual dimension of what is happening, it is part of the same picture. When your spirit is under sustained assault, your body absorbs the cost right alongside it. I mention this because I think it is easy to treat the spiritual and the physical as two completely separate categories, when in reality they are deeply intertwined, and healing eventually has to address both. Eventually, there is a full inversion of values that takes place. They will work to make you question truths you once considered fundamental. Is love actually good? Is kindness genuinely a form of strength? Is faith actually worth anything? They will present remarkably convincing arguments for why cruelty is somehow necessary, why hardness should be considered wisdom, why cynicism is simply realism dressed up in a different name. And you need to understand something important here. When a narcissist fully surrenders themselves to darkness in this way, they become an active agent of spiritual destruction. They are no longer simply hurting you in the ordinary sense. They are actively trying to sever your connection to your own divine source. That becomes the underlying agenda running beneath everything they do. They want to pull you down to the same level of spiritual emptiness they themselves are trapped in. And here is the part that makes it especially dangerous. They very often maintain an outward appearance of spirituality or moral righteousness the entire time. They will quote scripture in one breath while tearing down your faith in the next. They will speak the language of love while simultaneously crushing your heart. They will present themselves as some kind of spiritual guide or teacher, while quietly leading you further into darkness with every step. I also want to name something that often goes unspoken in conversations like this one, which is the particular grief that comes with realizing all of this about someone you once loved deeply, someone you may have built a life with, someone you may still share history or children or a family with. This is not simply the grief of a relationship ending. It is the grief of realizing the version of them you fell in love with either never fully existed the way you believed, or existed once and has since been buried under everything I have just described. That grief deserves space. It deserves to be felt fully rather than rushed past. You are allowed to mourn what you believed you had, even while you are simultaneously protecting yourself from what is actually in front of you now. Now, if any of this feels like it is describing your own situation, I want you to know this is not a hopeless place to be standing in. There is real hope available to you, and that is exactly why it matters that we talk honestly about what the path forward actually looks like. Recognition is always the first real step toward protecting yourself. Once you understand that you are not simply dealing with a difficult person, not just someone who happens to be psychologically struggling, but with someone who has fully surrendered their own humanity to destructive forces, you are finally able to respond in a way that actually fits the reality of the situation. This is not about extending forgiveness. It is not about trying harder to understand them. It is not about attempting to heal or repair the relationship. None of that is realistically possible in a situation like this one. What you are dealing with here is spiritual warfare, plain and simple, and it needs to be approached and treated as exactly that. Protect your own energy carefully. Guard your spirit the way you would guard anything precious and irreplaceable, because it genuinely is irreplaceable. There is no getting it back once it has been ground down to nothing. So the guarding has to start now, today, not at some point after things get even worse. And remember, always, that your primary responsibility in all of this is to preserve the light that exists within you. Nothing matters more than that light, and it is precisely what they are trying to extinguish. Let the universe handle whatever karmic reckoning is coming their way. That part is not yours to manage or control. Your job, the only job that actually belongs to you in this, is to come through the experience with your soul intact. And if you manage to hold on to your own essence through all of it, everything else has a way of naturally sorting itself out in time. If you have been good, goodness finds its way back to you eventually. I understand how difficult that can be to believe right now, how hard it can feel to trust in something like that when you are in the middle of the pain, when every day feels like it is asking more of you than you have left to give. But that has genuinely been my own personal experience with all of this, and I do not say that lightly or as some rehearsed line I repeat for the camera. I have sat exactly where many of you are sitting right now, wondering whether any of this would ever resolve, whether the exhaustion would ever lift, whether staying good in the face of so much darkness was even worth the cost it seemed to demand. And what I found, slowly, unevenly, not on any schedule I could have predicted, was that it was worth it. When you have done right by yourself and by others, The right things do eventually find their way to you, and hope shows up exactly when you need it most, often in the very moments when everything feels the most hopeless, when you have least expected it and least believed it was coming. So hold on to that, but also stay alert. Learn to recognize these signs clearly. Understand what is actually happening around you so you can respond wisely instead of being caught off guard. Community matters too in all of this. Do not try to carry this alone in silence, whether that means confiding in a trusted friend, finding a support group of people who have lived through something similar, or working with someone who understands this kind of dynamic professionally. Isolation is exactly the condition that allows patterns like this to deepen unchecked, and connection with people who see you clearly, who can reflect reality back to you when your own perception has been worn down, is one of the most protective things you can build into your life right now. One last thing I want to leave you with before we close today. Preserving your own light does not mean becoming hard, and it does not mean becoming cynical or closed off to love in general. That would actually hand them a kind of victory, because part of what this pattern tries to do is convince you that softness itself was your mistake, that opening your heart was the vulnerability that let all of this happen. Do not let that lesson take root. The goal is not to build a wall around yourself so thick that nothing can ever reach you again. The goal is discernment, the ability to keep your heart open while also seeing clearly, to remain capable of love and trust while no longer being naive about who deserves access to that love and trust. That distinction matters enormously for what comes after this chapter of your life. You are not meant to spend the rest of your life guarded and closed. You are meant to come out the other side of this wiser, more discerning, and still whole enough to love again when the right person shows up. And with that, let's bring today's episode to a close. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I will see you in the next one. Until then, as always, let the healing begin.